June 6, 1944. 063 hours Omaha Beach, Normandy. The steel ramp slams down into the surf. Salt water churns white against rusted metal. 81 men surge forward into chest-deep water, weighted down by 60 pounds of equipment, rifles held high above their heads. Behind them, the boxy, flat-bottomed craft that delivered them pivots awkwardly in the waves, its angular hull catching the current, its ungainly silhouette backlit by the smoke of 1,000 naval guns. To the German soldiers entrenched in concrete pillboxes 400 yards up the bluff, these boats appear almost comical in their simplicity. No sleek lines, no armored flanks, just crude rectangles of plywood and steel, wallowing in the foam like bathtubs set adrift. One Wehrmacht officer, watching through field glasses from bunker WN62, later recorded in his diary that the American landing craft looked like floating coffins built by farmers. He was half right. They were built with the simplicity of a Louisiana swamp boat, but they would carry more men into battle, faster and more reliably, than any vessel in the history of amphibious warfare. By nightfall on that single blood-soaked day, more than 34,000 American troops would wade ashore on Omaha Beach alone, within 72 hours of H-hour, across all 5 landing zones: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. Over 220,000 Allied soldiers would establish the foothold that would break the Atlantic Wall and begin the liberation of Europe. The vast majority of them arrived in the same unglamorous, derided vessel, the LCVP, the landing craft, vehicle, personnel. History would come to know it by another name, the Higgins Boat, and the Germans who had mocked its design, who had dismissed its creator as an unsophisticated backwater tinkerer, would learn in the span of 3 days that industrial genius does not always announce itself with elegance. Sometimes it arrives in a flat-bottomed box, painted grey, reeking of diesel and seawater, carrying 36 men toward a beach defended by the most fortified military in the world. Andrew Jackson Higgins did not look like a man who would change the course of the war. He was a lumber baron from Nebraska by way of New Orleans, a profane, cigar-chomping entrepreneur with a 6th-grade education and a volatile temper. He built boats for oil drillers and rum runners during Prohibition, crafting shallow-draft vessels that could navigate the tangled bayous of Louisiana without scraping bottom. His designs were utilitarian, almost crude: plywood hulls, simple engines, a spoon-shaped bow that could slide up onto muddy banks and retract without capsizing. The U.S. Navy, when it first examined his work in the mid-1930s, was unimpressed. Naval architects trained at Annapolis looked at Higgins's boats and saw everything a warship should not be: unarmored, exposed, defenseless. But Higgins understood something the Navy did not yet grasp. The next war would not be won by dreadnoughts trading shells across open water. It would be won by the ability to put men and machines onto hostile shores, quickly, repeatedly, and in overwhelming numbers. In 1938, the Marine Corps began experimenting with amphibious assault tactics. The Navy's existing landing craft were disasters: slow, prone to grounding, incapable of retracting from a beach under fire. Higgins heard about the trials and showed up uninvited in Virginia with one of his swamp boats. The Marines were skeptical, but when Higgins's boat roared up onto the sand, disgorged its cargo, and reversed back into the water in under a minute, they paid attention. Still, the boat had one fatal flaw: men had to climb over the sides to disembark, exposing themselves to enemy fire. A Marine officer suggested a front ramp. Higgins, ever pragmatic, added one. The LCVP was born. The Germans were aware of the Higgins boat long before D-Day. Intelligence reports circulated through Wehrmacht command, describing the American landing craft as primitive, a product of a nation that valued speed of production over engineering sophistication. Kriegsmarine analysts noted with disdain that the boats were largely made of plywood, that their sides offered no protection from small arms fire, that their flat bottoms made them vulnerable to rough seas. In the cafes and officers' clubs of occupied Paris, German naval officers joked that the Americans were planning to invade Europe in wooden crates. There was a certain logic to this contempt. Germany had pioneered advanced landing craft designs: the Siebel ferry, the Marine Fairpram, vessels with armored hulls and heavier firepower. The Higgins boat, by comparison, seemed like the product of a nation that did not understand modern naval warfare. What the Germans failed to comprehend was that the Higgins boat was not designed to win a firefight. It was designed to be built by the thousands, operated by men with minimal training, and replaced within weeks if destroyed. Andrew Higgins had industrialized amphibious assault. His factories in New Orleans operated around the clock, employing over 20,000 workers, many of them women and African Americans, groups largely excluded from wartime shipbuilding elsewhere. Higgins didn't care about tradition or hierarchy. He cared about output. His assembly lines turned out landing craft the way Detroit turned out automobiles: fast, functional, and in staggering numbers. By the end of the war, Higgins Industries had produced more than 20,000 LCVPs, along with thousands of other landing craft variants. Dwight Eisenhower would later say that Higgins won the war for us. Adolf Hitler, in a rare moment of frustrated clarity, called him the new Noah. April 1942. Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands. The 1st Marine Division wades ashore from a fleet of Higgins boats, boots sinking into black volcanic sand. There is no opposition. The Japanese garrison, caught off guard, has retreated into the jungle. The Marines expect a fight. What they do not expect is how quickly they can reinforce. Wave after wave of landing craft shuttles men, ammunition and supplies from transport ships to the beach. Within 6 hours, 11,000 Marines are ashore. The speed is unprecedented. Traditional landing operations using ships' boats and cargo nets would have taken days. The Higgins boat collapses that timeline into hours. Japanese commanders observed this with growing alarm. In previous Pacific engagements, Wake Island, the Philippines, American forces had struggled with logistics, their supply lines fragile and slow, but here the Americans are landing faster than they can be repelled. Radio intercepts reveal Japanese confusion. One intercepted message from a garrison commander on Tulagi reads, "Enemy is landing in great numbers. Their boats come and go without stopping. We cannot count them." The psychological impact is immediate. The Japanese had planned their island defenses on the assumption that American amphibious capability was limited, that each landing would be a slow, vulnerable process. The Higgins boat shattered that assumption. German observers stationed in the Pacific as part of Axis intelligence sharing agreements sent detailed reports back to Berlin. These reports are cautious, analytical. They describe the LCVP's shallow draft, its ability to beach and retract rapidly, its ease of operation, but the tone remains dismissive. One German naval attaché writing from Tokyo in late 1942 notes that while the Higgins boat is effective in uncontested landings, it remains highly vulnerable to concentrated defensive fire. He predicts that against a prepared German defense, concrete bunkers, overlapping fields of fire, mined obstacles, the American landing craft would suffer catastrophic losses. This assessment would be tested 2 years later on the beaches of Normandy. The Atlantic Wall was the most ambitious coastal defense system ever constructed. Stretching from Norway to the Spanish border, it consisted of thousands of bunkers, gun emplacements, and obstacles, dragon's teeth, Belgian gates, hedgehogs, and millions of mines. Hitler himself had declared it impregnable. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, tasked with strengthening the defenses in 1944, believed that the invasion had to be stopped at the waterline. His strategy was brutal in its simplicity: destroy the landing craft before the troops could disembark. He ordered the beaches studded with obstacles designed to rip open the hulls of approaching boats, sharpened stakes angled seaward, steel rails topped with mines, concrete tetrahedrons that would gut a flat-bottomed craft at high tide. Rommel studied intelligence reports on the Higgins boat. He understood its capabilities: speed, shallow draft, rapid unloading. His countermeasures were designed specifically to exploit its weaknesses. The plywood hull could be shredded by machine gun fire. The exposed ramp made disembarking troops easy targets. The flat bottom, while ideal for beaching, made the craft vulnerable to underwater obstacles. In war games conducted in early 1944, German commanders simulated an Allied landing and concluded that with proper preparation, they could destroy or disable 40% of the landing craft before they reached the beach. The remaining 60% would disgorge their troops into a killing zone. The Atlantic Wall would hold. What Rommel could not simulate was scale. June 6, 1944, 05:03 hours. The English Channel. 5,000 ships move through the darkness, the largest amphibious armada in history. At the heart of this fleet are the Higgins boats, hundreds upon hundreds of them, swaying in the pre-dawn swells, crammed with soldiers who have been soaked by spray since they climbed down the cargo nets 2 hours earlier. Many are vomiting, some are praying, a few sleep, heads lolled against the shoulders of the men beside them. The boats form vast circular patterns around their motherships, waiting for the signal. When it comes, they turn toward the coast in long, ragged lines, engines roaring, white wakes spreading behind them like the trails of some vast, unstoppable migration. From the German bunkers, the sight is incomprehensible. The sea is filled with landing craft, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. They come in waves, each wave depositing its cargo and turning back for more. Machine guns chatter, mortars arc into the surf, shells from 88mm guns tear through the thin hulls of the Higgins boats, splintering wood and flesh together. At Omaha Beach, the slaughter is immediate and horrific. Boats are hit before their ramps drop, others disgorge men into water over their heads, and soldiers, weighted down by equipment, drown before they can fire a shot. Bodies float in the surf, blood clouds the foam. For 2 hours, it seems as though Rommel's calculations were correct. The invasion is being stopped at the waterline, but the boats keep coming. This is the thing the Germans did not account for. The Higgins boat was not a masterpiece of engineering, it was a masterpiece of industrial redundancy. For every boat destroyed, 3 more arrived. For every ramp that jammed, 10 more dropped cleanly. The boats were replaceable, almost disposable, and behind them was the full weight of American industrial might. Higgins Industries alone could replace 100 destroyed landing craft within a week. The Germans, by contrast, could not replace a single pillbox once it was destroyed. The Atlantic wall was static. The Higgins boat was fluid, and fluidity in the end was everything. By mid-morning, the trickle of men reaching the bluffs had become a stream. By afternoon, a flood. The German defenders, even those in the strongest positions, began to experience something they had not felt since the early days of the Eastern Front: inevitability. No matter how many boats they sank, more appeared. No matter how many men they killed, more came ashore. The Wehrmacht had fought against superior numbers before, but never against superior logistics executed with such mechanical precision. One captured German lieutenant, interrogated on June 8, described the experience in his debriefing. "We could not believe how many boats there were. We thought if we sank enough they would stop. They did not stop. They never stopped. It was like trying to hold back the tide." By the end of June 8, 72 hours after the first ramp dropped on Omaha Beach, more than 220,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy. Over 100,000 tons of equipment, tanks, jeeps, artillery, ammunition, had been ferried from ship to shore. The Atlantic Wall, that monument to German engineering and strategic obsession, had been breached not by a wonder weapon or a brilliant tactical maneuver, but by a flat-bottomed boat built in a New Orleans warehouse by workers who had never seen the ocean. The German High Command scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. Post-invasion reports analyzed every element of the Allied assault: naval bombardment, airborne drops, armored support. But one factor appeared again and again in Wehrmacht after-action assessments: the speed of the American buildup. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of German forces in the West, wrote in a classified report that the Allies had achieved a logistical advantage we cannot counter. He did not elaborate, but the implication was clear. Germany had no equivalent to the Higgins boat. They had no way to move men and material at that scale and speed. The industrial capacity that could produce 20,000 landing craft in 3 years was the same capacity that could produce 50,000 tanks, 80,000 aircraft, and 5 million rifles. The Higgins boat was not just a tactical tool, it was a symbol of an economic system that could outproduce, outbuild, and outlast any adversary. Andrew Higgins never sought glory. He was a businessman, not a philosopher, but his creation embodied a peculiarly American approach to warfare: pragmatism over elegance, quantity over prestige, adaptability over tradition. The Higgins boat was not beautiful, it was not sophisticated, but it worked. And in war, that is the only metric that matters. In the years after the war, historians would dissect D-Day from every angle: strategy, intelligence, courage, sacrifice. The Higgins boat would be footnoted, a logistical detail in the grand narrative, but the German soldiers who survived Normandy remembered it differently. In POW camps, and in the memoirs they would write decades later, they spoke of the boats with a kind of grudging awe, not because they were fearsome, but because they were relentless. One former Wehrmacht officer, interviewed in 1979, put it simply: "We thought the Americans were soft, that they would break when they saw what war really was, but those boats kept coming. That's when we knew we had lost." There is a photograph taken on Omaha Beach in the late afternoon of June 6. In the foreground, a Higgins boat sits tilted in the sand, its ramp still down, abandoned. Bullet holes riddle its starboard side, blood stains the deck. Behind it, stretching up the bluff, a line of soldiers moves inland, a thin, weary column disappearing into the smoke. The boat is empty now, its work done, it delivered its cargo, it did its job. In 3 days, it would be patched, refloated, and sent back into service. In 3 months, it would carry more men onto another hostile shore. In 3 years, it would be scrapped for metal, melted down, forgotten. But on that day, in that moment, it was the hinge upon which history turned. Not a sword, not a shield, just a simple, clumsy, flat-bottomed boat, mocked by those who did not understand that wars are not won by the sharpest blade, but by the ability to deliver a million dull ones, again and again and again, until the enemy has nothing left but the memory of mockery and the weight of defeat.